CSEC Biology with yours truly, Miss Shallow. In today's lesson, we will be talking about cells, specifically the functions of the organelles. This is our second video in our series of cells, and if you have not seen the introductory video, check the link in the description box below. In today's lesson, we will compare and contrast a typical plant and animal cell, and we will describe the function of the organelles. So let's go! If we were to examine a fairly simple diagram of a typical plant and animal cell, we would see some clear similarities and distinct differences. From these two diagrams, it is clear to see that both the plant and animal cell have a cytoplasm, a nucleus, a cell membrane, and mitochondria. Even though it is not seen in this particular diagram, plant and animal cells also both have ribosomes. We can also clearly see that the plant cell has a cell wall while the animal cell does not, and that the plant cell has a permanent vacuole and chloroplast. So essentially, the similarities between plants and animal cells are they both have a cell membrane, they both have a nucleus, they both have cytoplasm, they both have mitochondria, and they both have ribosomes. Now, the main differences between a plant and animal cell, and we should always remember that when we're talking about a difference, we have to state two bits of information. So the main differences between the plant and animal cell are: one, the animal cell does not have a cell wall. The cell wall is absent in the animal cell, whereas it is present in the typical plant cell. It is the presence of this cell wall in the plant cell that gives the plant cell a more defined or rigid shape or structure, whereas the animal cell has an irregular shape. The second main difference is in the presence of the chloroplast. The chloroplast is absent in the animal cell, but it is present in the plant cell, and we're going to learn why the chloroplast is present in a plant cell and not in an animal cell. The third main difference between a typical animal cell and a typical plant cell has to do with the vacuole. In an animal cell, the vacuole is small and temporary, whereas in the plant cell, the vacuole is large and permanent. At any given time, when a plant cell is viewed under a microscope, the vacuole is clearly seen. As a matter of fact, in many of the cells, the vacuole is so large that it takes up the majority of the space within the cell. In the typical animal cell, however, vacuoles are small, and they are not always present, as these vacuoles are temporary. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they are not. Now let's get into our organelles. The first organelle we're going to look at is the cell membrane. Now, the cell membrane is found in all cells. It is often called the surface membrane or the plasma membrane. Now, in the plant cell, the cell membrane is sometimes difficult to see because it is pushed right up against the cell wall. Cell membrane, though it is a thin layer, has a very complex structure. The cell membrane is actually made up of two layers of fat, and we call those layers phospholipid bilayer, bi meaning two, and there are special protein molecules that span both of the layers. So, our cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer with proteins. It is the outer membrane in the animal cell, and as an outer membrane, it protects the cell. Outer membranes often serve as protection. Being the outer membrane also means that the cell membrane encloses the cytoplasm. But more importantly, the cell membrane is the barrier between the inside of the cell and the outside. And as that barrier, the cell membrane controls the materials that pass across the cell. It does so by selecting what can enter and exit the cell. Those protein molecules that span the phospholipid bilayer have an important role in choosing or selecting what materials would pass across the cell. Because the cell membrane controls what enters and exits the cell, it is often described as being selectively permeable. Permeable meaning allowing materials to pass through, but because it chooses or it controls what passes, it selects what passes, it is called selectively permeable. Next, we move on to our cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is actually a clear jelly. Do not be fooled by the colors that are viewed under a microscope. The cytoplasm is actually very clear. In order to view cells under a microscope, the cells have to be stained, and when they're stained, they're often seen under the microscope with that particular stain color. But the cytoplasm is clear. In fact, the cytoplasm is made up almost entirely of water, but it does have quite a few substances dissolved in it. And the cytoplasm plays a very important role in the cell. It is actually the site of many metabolic reactions. So many of the reactions occurring within the cell takes place in the cytoplasm. Then we have our nucleus. Our nucleus appears to be a very simple structure. It is surrounded by a nuclear envelope or a nuclear membrane through which materials can pass via the pores. It also contains a nucleolus, which plays a very important role overall in how the nucleus functions. Now, the nucleus is often referred to as the brain of the cell. And just like how our brains control what we do, the nucleus controls the activities of the cell. It is able to control the activities of the cell because the nucleus can command the type of proteins that are to be made by the cell. And the nucleus is able to command the type of protein because it contains or stores the genetic information that will tell the cell what type of proteins to be made. Here's a fun fact. Even though the nucleus is so important, it's considered the brain of the cell, there are some cells that do not have a nucleus. For example, our mature red blood cells do not contain a nucleus. And it is for that reason why our mature red blood cells cannot do some of the things that our ordinary cells do, like replicate and make another one. Instead, they have a very short shelf life, die, and are replaced when new red blood cells are formed. Now back to our nucleus. The genetic information that is contained or stored in the nucleus is in the form of a molecule that I'm sure you have already heard about. and that molecule is DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid is a double helical molecule, and when we say double helical, we're essentially talking about two strands put together like a ladder, and then that is twisted, and it is that twisted shape that we call a helix. And this DNA is the actual code or the blueprint for all of the proteins that are going to be made by the cells, and those proteins would in turn determine the characteristics or features of the organism. For example, your DNA contains the code that will determine whether you have blue eyes, brown eyes, or green eyes. Our DNA is found on special structures that are called chromosomes. Chromosomes essentially are DNA and special proteins that are called histones. And chromosomes are not usually seen within the nucleus. They only become visible when the cell is getting ready to undergo cell division. Another fun fact: each organism has a specific set or number of chromosomes. For example, humans have 23 pairs or 46 chromosomes. The picture of your set of chromosomes is called your karyotype, and this is the karyotype of a human, where we have our 23 pairs. The first 22 pairs determine all other characteristics such as your eye color, your skin color, your ability to roll your tongue, whereas the last pair, the 23rd pair, determines your gender. In this case, we see XY, so this karyotype belongs to a male. We'll learn all about karyotypes later. So, in today's lesson, we learned that both plant and animal cells have cell membranes, nucleus, cytoplasm, mitochondria, and ribosomes. We also learned that the plant cells have some organelles that are absent in the animal cell. These include the cell wall, the chloroplast, and a permanent vacuum. The cell membrane controls what materials passes into and out of the cell, and so the cell membrane is described as selectively permeable. The cytoplasm is the site of many metabolic reactions, and the nucleus stores the genetic information which directs the cell to create specific proteins that will determine the characteristics of the organism. If you liked this video and you learned a lot, please be sure to hit the like button and share it with all of your friends doing biology. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and be the first to know when our next video airs. Our next video will look at the functions of all of the other organelles of the cell. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.